Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new indie authors. Find us on all major podcast systems and YouTube. Join B Alan Bourgeois on today's show. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Indie Beacon Show. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois, and I have with me a gentleman by the name of Fred Williams, who has quite an interesting background. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you for letting me be on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. We're going to talk about your two books, but before we do that, we want to get people to know who you are and what you're about, okay? So you have, like I said, a very interesting background. You went to college, and immediately out of college, if I'm correct, you got into the politics, but not as a politician, but as an assistant. Is that correct?
Yes, for Senator Bourgeois of Indiana.
Okay, how'd that come about?
Well, he was doing a search throughout the state of Indiana to bring African-American to his staff in Washington, D.C. I was working on my doctorate degree at Indiana University, had run for the president of the association, won, and so one of the professors told me, why don't you apply for this job? Now, I'm in Indiana from California. I didn't think I had a chance because of all the people from Indiana. So I said, yeah, I'll go over and talk to the senator. So I went over there, relaxed, had a great conversation, and lo and behold, 2 days later, I got a call. He said he wants to hire you, bring you to Washington, D.C. to be on his staff. So that's how I got there.
That must have been pretty exciting at that time.
It was really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking many years ago. I'm not going to say your age, but it is a few years ago. So I mean, a lot of
77, 78. Jimmy Carter had just been elected.
Okay, so with that, I mean, talking about the 80s, you're coming off of a lot of political storm and you're getting ready for a little bit more political storm, but it was during a time when you actually had Washington working.
Yes.
That must have been quite different from what you see now. How do you feel about that?
It's disturbing, it's distressing. Because back then, senators would do things, even if their constituents might not agree to that particular issue, they would do things that were best for the country. Bourgeois is the best kept secret in terms of a liberal senator from a conservative state in the history of the Senate. I can recall leaders like Vernon Jordan, Jesse Jackson would come to me and say, hey, we need the senator to introduce this particular amendment on a bill. He never failed. And it's amazing how he was able to win over and over again in Indiana until it caught up with him with the conservative movement of 1980, and he was defeated in that election.
Okay. I really am interested and want to learn more about that, but because we have a limited time on our show, we'll go ahead and move forward a little bit. But I do want to touch base. You helped create the Martin Luther Jr. birthday recognition in the Congress, correct?
Yes, sir. I'll never forget the day that the senator called me and said, hey, we got to go down to Senator Kennedy's office. I didn't know why we were going down there. We went down there, and Coretta Scott King and John Conyers were there. And Mrs. King asked the two senators, would you introduce legislation to make my husband's birthday a national holiday? They had run into a lot of opposition on the House side because it was still controlled by Southern senators on the committees. So Bai and Kennedy agreed that they would do it. I had a good friend, he's still a good friend, Peter Parham was the black staffer for Kennedy. They turned it over to us. We put the hearing together for them. And that was the first hearing that eventually became, it passed in 1983 and became the King holiday legislation.
Congratulations. I'm sure you're very proud of that.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely.
Well, you've got other things to be proud of because you've done a lot of teaching about African Americans and Blacks in literature. Give us a little recap of that, how all that come about and why you still do it.
Well, I decided to leave Washington, D.C. because I really wanted to get back to my writing. And so my wife agreed that we could come here to San Antonio, away from the politics. And I told her, well, I'll write my novel. I'll be the next John Grisham, and we can retire. That didn't happen. She said, hey, it didn't happen. Don't you think you need to get a job? So I applied to University of Texas, San Antonio, and to also the community colleges. I was hired on at UTSA as an adjunct professor. One of the professors there, Dr. Richard Gambetta, and I and a couple other, Dr. Rudy Rosales, decided that we needed a African-American Studies minor at the university, because you really can't move towards tier one. I mean, I think it's true, unless you do have something dealing with the African-American studies. So we put the courses together. I taught a course on the civil rights movement. I taught an African-American political thought, African-American politics. Then I taught a course on the Harlem Renaissance and African literature up through the Black Arts movement, from Phillis Wheatley through the Black Arts movement. My favorite course, one of my favorites, was the Harlem Renaissance. I am in the process now, if I can get back to doing it, of writing a novel on the Harlem Renaissance called Making My Way to Harlem.
Okay. And so we only have just a few minutes left of this segment. I want to get into one of your books right off the bat. So let's start with Bayard and Martin.
Okay.
What is that about? And give us a little bit of taste.
Yes. A gentleman from New York came to me and asked me if I knew a Bayard Rustin. I said, yeah, because I taught civil rights, so I'd use Rustin. He said, well, I'd like to. Rustin they've silenced him over the years because he was gay. And this man was also gay. And he said, I'd like for you to write a novel on Rustin, and then we can try to make it into a movie. I said, okay. So I started researching. Oh my God, there's no way I could write a novel on his entire life. I mean, it would have been 1,500 pages. So I came up with the idea, let's limit it to his relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King. And I thought that was unique because very few people know they had a relationship. The average person say, oh, a Baptist minister does not have a relationship with a gay man. That's not true. And a lady by the name of Lillian Smith, what was happening with the Montgomery bus boycott is it was getting violent. And so this lady knew that we couldn't win in a violent skirmish. So she suggested to King, you need to get Bayard Rustin down here to show you how to use the nonviolent approach. So Bayard goes down there, he gets there in January of 1956. It's interesting because he shows up at Dr. King's house and there's a gun in the chair. And so when they go to the kitchen, Bayard says, Martin, the first thing you have to do is get rid of that gun. And Martin says, well, you know, they just bombed my house the other day. I got to protect my family. He said, no, no, no. Nonviolence is a discipline. I don't care what they do to you, you cannot strike back. And he was able to teach that to King. And King adopted that and used it from that day on. A lot of people believe that King learned the concept of nonviolence from Mahatma Gandhi. He didn't. He learned it from Bayard Rustin because Rustin had gone to India and studied nonviolence and came back. Now, they see it's successful in Memphis. Montgomery. So Rustin tells King, look, this is the tactic we're going to use to break segregation throughout the South, but you need a foundation. So you need to create an organization. So King says, go back to New York, do that for me. So he goes back to New York. They put together the blueprint for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They have a meeting in Atlanta, and all the ministers, Black ministers of the South, show up. And so King presents the blueprint to them. They all buy off on it. And of course, King is going to be the president. Now, here's the issue. King says the executive director obviously should be Bayard Rustin. Oh man, those Black ministers went crazy. We cannot have a faggot leading a Baptist organization. Now, King was willing to fight for Bayard to be the executive director, but Bayard said, no, 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 I'll back off because you don't need to start off with this kind of dissension. So he backed off. So he's responsible for the nonviolence, the concept. He's responsible for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now, here's what happens. In 1960, Martin Luther King is threatening to boycott the Democratic convention in LA. Kennedy finds out about it, gets to Adam Clayton Powell and says, hey, Powell, you're my man, make them call this off. So King is at a prayer meeting in Brazil. He calls King and says, if you go through with that march, I'm going to put out the word that you're having a homosexual relationship with Bayard Rustin. So King calls Rustin back in New York and tells him what's happening. And now King tells Rustin, look, I have to sever my relationship with you. And Rustin says, why? He says, because he's going to put out this rumor. Now, this is interesting to hear. Rustin says, well, they're putting out rumors that you're a womanizer. King says, my congregation can accept that. They can't accept me having a gay relationship. So that ends their relationship. And in the book, in the novel, I have Bayard. I concentrate on Bayard because he goes overseas, goes to India to work on nonviolence over there and nuclear, breaking down nuclear weapons. He comes back. Now, a key person in all this is A. Philip Randolph. He's like a father to Bayard Rustin. So he calls him, I think it's in 1962, he calls him into his office and says, look, you know, my march didn't happen in 1942. I want it now. And he says, you're the only person that has the capability of organizing this march. And the other person that has to do it is Dr. King. Bayard says, well, he's not even talking to me. I mean, he dismissed our relationship. He says, we're gonna patch that up. So believe it or not, in the book I show where King is in Philip Randolph's office, Bayard comes in and King kind of reaches out to him. To me, that was King saying, I'm sorry. I should have never done that. And so
we're going to stop right there.
Stop there? Yes, sir.
Yeah. We're at that time, we've got to let our sponsors do their thing. Okay. I don't want to interrupt, but unfortunately we have to make our money. Okay. But it's also a good spot where people can get the book, learn more about what does happen after that point and stuff, as it is quite fascinating history and stuff. But we will be back in just a moment, and thank you very much. Mary Ann Fairmouth is a career consultant with 30 years experience in the national recruiting world, a multi-award-winning author in multi-genres, and a speaker that gives presentations to help you succeed. Her book, Revolutionary Recruiting, made the top 20 global list of recruiting books. Find her on Amazon, your favorite bookstore, or at fairmouth.com.
To embrace your children's imagination, check out Diane Floyd Bame's books for kids. There's The Moonling Adventures, all about the animals in the Serengeti. And then there's Harry the Camel, learning to love yourself just the way you are. Then The Little Girl in the Moon. There's one about friendship, another one about the big ideas, which is an inspirational story. And then Tour Tycho Town, right there in Tycho Crater on the moon. All of Diane Floyd Bame's books are available at B4R Store.
Hello, I am the author Denise Bryson. My first book is The Things That Cross My Mind, Inspirational Poetry with Life Lessons. And then my audio book is Love's Reality. And it is also inspirational poetry with a jazzy flair. And then my new book is The Sex, the Lies, and the Soul Ties. They're really short stories written from a poetic expression. And then I have my first children book series, the Blinky series, which the first book is called Meet the Coins, and it is both in English and Spanish. And then the new book, From Coins to Bills. I am the author, Denise Bryson.
Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new indie authors. Find us on all major podcast systems and YouTube. Join B Alan Bourgeois on today's show. And welcome back. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois. You are either watching or listening to the Indie Beacon Show. We appreciate that. Today I have with me Fred Williams, who has been talking about his book, Bayard and Martin, which is quite fascinating. But he's got another book that is just as fascinating and has been in the news quite a lot lately, and that is Fires of Greenwood. So tell us what inspired you to write that book.
Back in 2009, a lady in Tulsa hired me to retain me to write her life story. While I was there, she said, let me take you down what used to be Black Wall Street. So we went across the tracks down Greenwood and went to the cultural center, and I saw these pictures of all the successful businesses and what happened. And I felt ashamed because I had never heard of it, never heard of it. And she said, don't think you're the Lone Ranger. It was a conspiracy of silence. It was so devastating that they took it out of the history books. They did everything. But what happened in, I think it was 1990, somebody by the name of Don Ross forced them to open up the investigation again. And so they did a commission's report. Now a lot of people start writing about it. And I read everything on it and wasn't happy with what I read. The facts were pretty on target, but the interpretation I didn't like. So I decided to do further research. One of the big issues was Dick Rowland had gone across the street into the Drexel building to the third floor to use the colored restroom. Comes out, gets on Sarah Page's, Dick Rowland's 19-year-old black guy, Sarah Page's 17-year-old white girl. So something happens on the elevator, they get to the first floor, and she runs out hollering, help, help, help. That leads, that's a stimulus that leads to it. I argue that's not what really caused it, but that's a stimulus. But the question is, what happened on that elevator? So every other writer says, well, Dick Rowland stumbled into her or he did something. And now one thing I did find out, Dick Rowland was a superb dancer, really good. So what's the chances he's gonna stumble? Well, there was a lady by the name of Gates, Miss Gates, who was on the commission. I had the opportunity to interview her, I think it was about 2010. She told me the story that Venice Dunn was 17 at the time of the riot or invasion, I call it. I don't use massacre, invasion. And she talks about how she wants to go to her prom, but on June 1 is when it happened, she couldn't go to prom. So Miss Gates says, well, you know, everybody wants to know what happened between Dick Rowland and Sarah Page. Venice says they were lovers and everybody in the Black community knew it. Now think about 1921, where would a Black man and a white girl meet? It would be in the Black community, certainly not in Oklahoma in the white community. So that was my first clue. The second one, when they arrested Dick Rowland, they went to Sarah Page to get her to testify. She wouldn't. I mean, she locked up. She refused. In fact, she left town and went to Kansas City, which is important. The third thing that happened, well, when she wouldn't testify, they had to let Dick Rowland go. But by now you got a mob out front, everything. So they sneak him out the back door. They whisk him off to Kansas City. So my third clue was he writes his mother, Damie Rowland, and says, Sarah Page is here with me now, bugging me. So that was enough for me to say they were lovers. So I wrote it as they were lovers, and what happened at the elevator was a lover spat. Why would I do that? Because my own experience when I was young, I think I was about 12 years old, my uncle was married to a white woman. They were walking down the street in Saginaw, Michigan. They got into an argument. She ran into the bar and it was a white bar, and he wanted me to go in there with him. We went in there and she started hollering the N-word, he's going to attack me. We got out of there. So I know that kind of thing could happen. When we know that when a lot of white women were found in those kinds of relationships, they hollered rape and everything else to save themselves. And that's what she was angry at him on that elevator, and I create scenes why she was angry in the novel. By the way, it has now been made into a screenplay, Heroes of Black Wall Street. We now have Mr. Danny Glover working with us, and we're hoping to get the funding and have it out next year. So
that's great. Let me ask you this. It's a logical conclusion to say that they probably had a spat on the elevator and that's what led to her coming out like that. But I'm curious, could it also have been possibly a challenge of some sort, knowing where they were, kind of playing with each other and daring each other maybe to do something, which just ended up getting out of hand?
Yeah, it could be that, but I can't accept the fact that other historians have written it as him stumbling. In other words, it was caused by him. is what they're doing. And we're used to that in history when it comes to us. And I didn't write it as historical nonfiction. I wanted to write it as fiction because I knew if I write it right, I could get my reader right in the story. You know, you show and you don't tell in writing now. And I think I accomplished that because I've gotten a lot of, well, it was good enough that some people looked at it and said, hey, we need to make this into a movie. Now we've had documentaries. LeBron James just did a documentary, was on CNN, but a documentary is like reading a history book. You know, it can get boring. When you do a film and they can feel the characters, and they like O.B. Mann and J.B. Stratford and men like this that went in there and built this community against tremendous odds, I think that people can get a better feel for what we're doing. And the reason I call it Heroes of Black Wall Street and not, as everybody else says, massacre, because I don't think you've ever heard the Alamo referred to as the massacre of the Alamo. No. But they got beat. But what they did, they made Davy Crockett and Jim Boy heroes. That's what we have to do for our kids with this film. It's important we do it that way.
So I'm curious, have you gotten any negative feedback about the love story itself?
No, absolutely not. It's interesting.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. But I kind of thought maybe there would be some response to that, only because it would, to me, kind of take away from what the event was overall. But it is a fictional story, so it really doesn't matter, I guess, in that respects.
What really caused the invasion is on May 31st, the Tulsa Tribune ran an article says a black boy costs white girl in elevator. That was the headline. Now, the editorial page said there will be a lynching. No one can find that editorial page. They wiped it out of the newspaper. I don't care where you look, you can't find it. So now you had all these black guys who went over and fought for World War I, learned how to fight. And, you know, Woodrow Wilson told blacks, well, if you go over and fight for democracy, when we come back here, we'll give you democracy. Well, we know that didn't happen. But O.B. Mann was a leading veteran. He came back and he told people in Tulsa, you will not lynch anybody in this city. Now all of a sudden they get this paper, this owner of the newspaper has blown this up. They march. Now you got to picture this, and this will be great in the movie. You have all these whites who are in town for Memorial Day. They're drinking, they got their guns. Now they want to lynch a black. That's how it usually happens. So they go to the courthouse where they arrested Dick Rowland and ask Sheriff McCullough, give us that in, give us that in. McCullough says, look, I have sharpshooters on the roof. And first guy who comes up these steps, they will shoot and kill you. So they back off. They call him the in lover, and all that stuff. But they're cool. Now all of a sudden you got all these black veterans marching in front of the courtroom between the whites and McCullough. McCullough says to O.B. Mann, man, what are you doing? Get out of here. You're going to wild these guys up again. He says, no, we're going to stay here to protect Miss Damien's baby boy. They're not going to lynch him. So the whites are now starting to holler and everything. So finally, McCullough convinces O.B. and the veterans to go back. So they start back towards the tracks. White guy, they didn't identify him. We don't know who he was. I created him in the novel and in the screenplay. But this really happened. He confronts O.B. Mann and says, inward, give me that gun. What you do with that gun on the white side of town? O.B. says, I'll shoot you if I have to. He says, I'll be damned. He goes for the gun. O.B. Mann shoots and kills a white man on the right side of town in 1921. My friend, that is what caused it. That is what Dick Rowland and Sarah Page were forgotten about now. And they went around, got every white man in the city. Plus they used airplanes, because the blacks retreated into the positions. And when the whites first started across the tracks, they're picking them off. So they said, we got to get those blacks out of those buildings. So they used airplanes. It's the first time that a civilian territory has been bombed by our own planes in this country's history. And the most pathetic part about it was, contrary to what people say, most blacks in Tulsa were poor and they lived in tissue thin houses. And so these guys who fly these planes, it got good to them. So they start going and bombing the homes too, and the people have come out burning up. But what we don't stress that, we stress the heroes, the guys who fought back. And we also stress what a beautiful thing Blacks were able to do. Can you imagine in 1921 with all the prejudice, all institutions against you, the national government, the courts, state and local governments, and you build a thriving economic community. That is something to behold.
Yeah, and I'm sure that also was the downfall for why it was written out of history, because knowing the mindset of that time, they didn't really want that to be focused on, the fact that African Americans could actually do that. So I'm sure that was part of why they pushed it out of history, so that it would be buried and forgotten, so no one else could think, oh, we can do this too by building our own Black Wall Street or whatever that is. And
Oh,
that is one of the
absolutely.
tragedies in itself.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely.
We are out of time again. So we will be back in just a moment after our sponsors do their thing. So come back. Publishing marketing package for authors, a $1,500 value, save 40% now. Includes a 6-piece marketing kit of 250 bookmarks, 250 business cards, 250 postcards, 1 table banner, 1 table runner, and 50 download cards, plus book cover design, ebook creation, PDF setups, upload to Ingram Spark, scroll placement, video commercial, and interview on IBS, plus much more. Email bourgeoismedia@look.com for details, or bourgeoismedia.com.
Hi, I'm Mel Greenberg, author of Running with Our Eyes Closed, book 1 in the Empty Nested series. To the world, Samantha has the perfect life. 3 wonderful children, a loving husband, so she thought, and a life split between Dallas and Italy. When her youngest leaves for college, it all comes crashing down, forcing Samantha to re-examine everything. Over 7 days in one of the most romantic countries in the world, Samantha faces the past she thought she'd overcome and begins to redefine her role as a woman, a wife, and a mother.
What would you do if you had to put your life on hold to care for a loved one? Well, during COVID, almost all of us have been doing just that. I'm Charlotte Canyon, award-winning author, actress, and speaker. And my book, You Have to Laugh to Keep from Crying, shows you how you can revive, thrive, and survive with 4 golden rules. You have to love one another. You have to respect one another. You have to have patience with one another. And most of all, you've got to forgive one another. I'm Charlotte Canyon, and I approve this message.
Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new indie authors. Find us on all major podcast systems and YouTube. Join B Alan Bourgeois on today's show. And welcome back. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois. You are either watching or listening to the Indie Beacon Show. We appreciate that. I have with me Mr. Williams, who's been telling me some stories specifically related to his books, but also his past. And it's been quite interesting, and I do recommend anyone to get the books, learn something new about history and the relationships that exist between people that are part of history. Mr. Williams, you do talk, do presentations and things like that. So how can people find you? What's your website? What's your social media? All that fun stuff.
Okay, but website is my publishing company. It's Pairee, Pairee, publications.com. And also they can email me at fredwilliams.satx@gmail.com. They can also get the books on Amazon.
Okay.
If they want an autographed copy, they can email me, and I'll be more than happy to work with them to send them an autographed copy of either one of the books.
Wonderful. And you do lots of different talks, you do different book festivals and things of that nature as well. Are you working on anything at the moment?
Yes, I'm working on making my way to Harlem, about the Harlem Renaissance. And I also am under contract to write, I talked to him today, Bill Cosby's version of what happened, along with Andrew Wyatt, his publicist, who you always see with him. I'm working on that right now.
That should be an interesting story. Real
Yes.
quickly about the possibility of the movie. You were hoping that will be out sometime next year. Do they
Yes,
have a
sir.
scheduled filming date yet?
No, we don't. No, we don't.
But hopefully it'll be done. So if nothing else, 22, 23, it might be out.
Yes, we're hoping 2022.
Yeah, the
We
sooner the
wanted to
better.
get it out in 2021, but you know, the virus stopped everything.
Yeah, it's still playing havoc on all of us.
Mm.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for being with us. We'll have the information up on our website as you watch the show. We wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to seeing what else comes out, and hopefully to the movie in next year.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching or listening to the Indie Beacon Show, produced by B Alan Bourgeois for the Authors Marketing International LLC. Copyright 2021. Voiceover by B Alan Bourgeois. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, please email us at authorsmarketing@outlook.com. If you would like to be on the show, please complete the form found on our website at indiebeacon.com. You may also watch previous year's shows on the website. Music is Frolic of Words, created for Indie Beacon